Hi guys, so this is Lizzie from Love From Lizi, and I'm here today with the Love From Lizi August 2017 10 cards 1 kit video. As always, the video is quite sped up just so that I can get as much content in as possible. So here we are, card number 1. I've started off by die cutting a circle of just white cardstock from my stash, and I've then stamped the small leaf which goes with the cherry onto some post-it note. This is just normal post-it note paper and fussy cut it out to create a mask. Then sort of lining up where it is I want the cherry and the leaves to sit. Using the mask there, I'm now stamping out my leaf, pop the mask on top so that I can stamp the second leaf to look like it's behind. Please excuse my head, it does make an appearance or two throughout this video. It's just to make sure that everything is lined up as it should be. So I've left that mask in place there again so that the tops of the cherries can join nicely. And here you can see I've taken the post-it away, and I'm using my chameleon pen from the kit just to colour these leaves in. And this is a really lovely, it's a great colour for leaves, stems, anything of that description. And as you can see here, you charge the pen, if you like, in the chamber, and then what comes out first is lightest and it gradually gets darker. So you just sort of pick where you want to have your darkest area and make that be the last area that you colour. And here I'm using the Nuvo drops, not necessarily in the way they were intended, almost as a colouring medium, but it made my cherries really nice and 3D and shiny because there's a lovely pearlescence. I cut a strip of patterned paper, and here I'm showing you how to make sort of fake peel-offs, if you like, so that they can fit into your colour scheme if you don't have the exact ones. And I'm using my Nuvo fine tip glue pen here, but you can use any kind of glue. What I like about this one is there isn't any mess out of the sides. If you are concerned you're going to make a mess out of the sides, then perhaps use multi-medium matte, because if that squidges out, it's not going to make any difference. But yeah, the fine tip of this pen is splendid, and it's perfect for these sorts of things, so there's no mess. And I'm just pressing these very fine pieces of cardstock. It was the pearlescent card from the kit, into that glue, and then I'm just trimming the edges top and bottom to get rid of any overhang. And there we have it. So that's the card base, good to go. I put 3 little Nuvo dots in the corner just to tie that red in once again. And then for the sentiment, I'm using VersaFine black Onyx black ink, and I'm stamping the scroll onto one of the patterned papers, which is quite a tone on tone, and it has sort of like different foods in the pattern. And here I'm just stamping Made with Love as well, and I fussy cut that out. And here, when I put the tile onto the pattern paper, it did look very white because the checkerboard is actually a little bit off-white. So as the Nuvo drops are still wet, I'm very carefully ink blending some antique linen onto the topper, if you like, and it didn't, because the Nuvo drops were still wet, I had to be quite careful, but it's good actually because it's created sort of a halo around the cherries, which I actually quite like, so happy mistake there. I'm using some foam squares here just to mount it up on top of the cherries, and then just deciding where to place it on my card, and I use some foam tape on the back of the die cut circle there, and that's the first card from the kit done. Card number 2. Okay, so here I'm wanting to use some of the Vellum. I really like this little phrase, and as always, because this is my specialty cardstock, I don't like to just use it on the trimmer and cut loads off in case it wastes pieces. So I use my T-square ruler and a pencil, and then I cut that way. And here I'm using one of my new Xyron machines because I do have the Creative Station, which is fantastic. However, it's much bigger than is needed for some of these smaller pieces of vellum. So I use my bone folder to go over it just to make sure that the adhesive has got a really good firm grip, if you like, on the back of the vellum tile. And then I've got a piece of the striped patterned paper there just off to the side, and this was just to show that there is a pattern in the back of the vellum. Now what I do here is I use my grid mat, I line it up as best I can, and then I lay the patterned paper using the grid of my craft mat into it to make sure that it's straight, because if you do anything like this crooked, it will really scream out. And then I just pop that on top of the red piece of pearlescent cardstock, and because of the stripes that come through the vellum, it really does show, which is great. And here I'm using the border stamp that came as part of the stamp set in the kit. And I just I pop a few of these lines. There's 4 in total, 3 across the top and then 1 at the bottom. And then I heat emboss those in clear. I pop some double-sided tape on the back of the tile and the stripes. Now, as you can see, the stripes actually aren't long enough at the top and are too long at the bottom. So rather than crying, I snipped it off and then made sure everything matched up again at the top, and I popped it back on again. So you couldn't really see the join, but just to cover it over and hide that little, should we call it omission? My lack of planning. I just used some of the twine. I put a couple of notches at the top of the card in the side just to keep it still, so that it didn't wriggle away from that join. And then I'm just using some double-sided sellotape here that I've balled up just to hold the bow in place over that join. And that's card number 2. So card 3, this is, these are some of the corners from the stamp set. I'll show you how I do a few of them, and then I've edited a lot of it out because it was much of the same. All I did was inked up using VersaFine these little craft hearts. I did cut them apart, obviously, because otherwise the stamps would have overlapped. And you must be ever so careful if you do the same, because the ink doesn't dry on the white parts, you know, the release paper. And I did get some on my fingers and I did smudge it a little bit, which was really frustrating. So please learn from my mistakes. I then mounted one of each pattern up on the brown pearlescent cardstock, and then I mounted up the other 3 onto the gold, and then fussy cut them all out. And I have a panel of the brown pearlescent cardstock here, and using my grid mat, I just line up some of the ribbon on with double-sided sellotape at both ends on the reverse side, and then once I've stuck that into place, I can cut it off so there's 0 waste, which also makes me happy. And you can't see the bond, which is fantastic because it is quite a thick ribbon. And because of that, on this one, as you can see there, I just popped it up on some foam rectangles, and then I placed the hearts and spread them out as evenly as was reasonable along the centre of that ribbon. And I'm using Glossy Accents here because Glossy Accents does have a very good hold, and it was within my reach. So now I'm just using some of the peel-offs that came in the kit. These are the hot chocolate ones. And all I'm doing is running along the edges of everything. Again, I'm really sorry about my head. But these are ever so straightforward to use. You just you put one end down, and as long as you hold that one still, don't pull it too hard because they do stretch. And then you can just lay it down, and they create a really finished look with not a lot of effort in my estimation. I used the thickest width on the base of the card. And then here, this one is the medium, which is quite close. And then I'm using the really skinny one just to the outer edges of the ribbon. And I keep all of the little bits and pieces, the leftover bits and pieces within reason, again. And you'll see in a card later on in this video what I do with those little bits. So, yeah, a little bit of stamp surgery there. Look away if it upsets you. I just cut off the Made from the Made with Love from the stamp set. Obviously, you can butt them back up again, or you could have masked it if you would prefer. And then all I'm doing here is with the Distress Oxide in Walnut Stain, I'm just stamping with Love in the bottom corner of the card. So there's a tiny little sentiment there. And on to now with card number 4. So here I'm using a die set. It's one of my Tim Holtz stitched packs. I will list it on the blog post. And I've just gone over one of the tiles because it did fit perfectly. So the tile has now got a stitched edge. And then I've also done that with a piece of the red pearlescent cardstock. And here I have just cut down a piece of the pattern paper just so that it leaves a very fine sort of border margin around the edge. And I'm using again that larger square that I used in the red. And I've cut the front of the card panel. Here I'm gluing in using Glossy Accents, again merely because it was on the desk to hand. And I'm running the vellum piece that matched this pattern paper through the little Xyron machine to give it some stick on the back. So rubbing my fingers along it. This is what I've been told by everyone, just to make sure the adhesive has got a really nice firm attachment to where it should be. And then take away all of the rubbish and the extra. and then just carefully place it into the centre of that square. Now this is one of my favourite sorts of cards. I like a bit of an interactive card, i.e. that has it does something, or it has a little window in it. So yeah, this is one of my go-to styles. And now I'm just essentially running over some of the aspects of the background paper with glossy accents. So some of the tiles, the eggs, I've done just the eggs, and some of them it's been all of it. And then these are some of the gold gems from the kit. And I'm just randomly sort of dotting a few around. And that is the end of that card. A nice, very quick and simple card. On to card 5, and here I've taken another one of the vellum pieces, and I'm using some of my Copic markers. Now, colouring through vellum creates a really subtle and soft look. If you're wanting this to be much stronger and starker, then you'll need to get some really dark tones for them to show up. But I'm just using 3 of them here, just to colour in the hair, the skin tone and the apron. I'd love to think that I wore an apron when I cook, but I think by the time I'd remember that I'd need to wear an apron would be by the time that there was food splattered on me, so I don't usually bother. And so yeah, once I've finished colouring those in, sorry I digress, I pick a piece of pattern paper and a red card base, and I'm using just some double-sided tape to fix that on. As ever, all I did there was, as I wasn't going to use a whole strip of the pattern paper, I do use the pencil and T-square ruler and measure and then cut it with my scissors, so to preserve more of the pattern paper. And yes, you do need to be careful with that particular one with the apples, so that make sure the apples are right way up. Here I've just run a peel off along the border. I just like the look of it. I think it makes them look tidier. And so here's the piece of vellum that I used to make my topper with, that I coloured with the Copic markers. And here I'm just mounting it onto some of my own white cardstock, and that is just so that you can see the colouring a bit, really. And again, it's still not overly stark. And then I trim that out so that it's nice and tidy on the edges, and I use the glossy accents again just to fix that back onto the middle top of the card. And just to finish it off and tidy up the edges, I run the middle-sized peel off all the way around the edge of the vellum piece. And all that does is just gives it a slight frame. And then I get the little heart from the stamp set. There's 2 hearts in there. And then I evenly space them out. So I do one in each corner, one in the centre, and then one in the middle of each of those, if that makes sense. It's just to add a little bit of interest into the back there, so that it's not just a flat red, just using a tone on tone approach. And then here I've picked out 2 of the different kinds of sequins that are in the little sequin mix in the kit, and these are the tiny little peach sort of cups, and then the small flat brown ones. And then this is how I often like to do sequins. I don't really place them as such. I just, with my glue, dot around, and then I move a sequin into the dot with no particular rule or design in mind. I just sort of scooch them along until they all sit, and that's it. That's the end of that card. So here's card 6. Now I know that I'm going to use the whole of this piece because I want to cover the whole card front. So here's the trimmer, and that I'm making a shaker now. So I create a frame using 2 of the square dies from Tim Holtz, and I just use some washi tape to secure those in place to keep the margins right. I cut those out, and then using the larger of the squares, I cut a sheet of acetate, and then I just stick that onto the back of the frame using glossy accents. Here I've folded some foam tape in half, which I've done in quite a few various previous videos, and then I create the wall, if you like, for all of the shaker pieces to be housed in. So I just trim them up and place them on, butting them up as close as I can. And here I'm using the die, which is made with love. Now I love this die because of how versatile it is. And you could have stuck it onto, I could have stuck it onto the front of the acetate. That would have been fine, but I decided to put it on the inside because I didn't want anything to be lost from the front, as I was going to put something else on there as well. So put it through the little Xyron machine, gave it a good rub over, and then peeled it away. Now, if I'm completely frank, I should have rubbed that for longer, because there was still quite a little bit of sticky, and the fact that I've put it in with the sequins, some of the sequins, they didn't quite stick, but they didn't move as freely as I wish they would. So from me, if you're going to put it in, I mean, it's a great way to do it because all the little bits and pieces are stuck down very well. However, I just didn't rub the glitter in hard enough. The glitter, my apologies, the glue. Okay, so here I'm taking one of the little tags that came in the kit, and I'm cutting a length of the twine, and I am just popping some foam up at the bottom of that tag, and then at the top, nearer sort of the eyelet area, I'll just pop some glue so that it will adhere onto the shaker. There we go. And then I use a little piece of double-sided tape behind the tails just to sort of fix those in place, and that's the end of card 6. Moving on to card 7. This may be my favourite, and I think it's one of the simplest. I am just a clean and simple girl at heart, I think. All I do here is I take the vanilla card base, I trim it down to make it exactly the same height as this piece of vellum, and then I cut a piece of acetate to be slightly longer on either side. And because of the size of this piece of vellum, I did have to get the Creative Station out, and because I'm a meanie, I did have to put another piece of vellum through at the same time so I didn't waste it. So that's ready for another time. But here, yes, I'm just giving it a good firm press, taking it off, and I mounted it into the centre of this piece of acetate that I've cut to be longer on either side, as I hope you can see there. Made sure that it was nicely stuck down, and then I trimmed along the top and the bottom to make sure there wasn't any overhang at all. Now, where you saw me draw with pencil lines on the card base, I cut that centre piece out, which coincidentally I managed to use in another kit, so waste not, want not with the cardstock. And now I'm using some glossy accents, once I managed to pierce a hole into it as it had blocked up again. And I just use the acetate as sort of an anchor point, and I do that on both sides, and I stick the acetate to sit on top of the card base, as it were. So then that way it's all hidden from the inside of the card. And now, just to cover over the top of that acetate, I'm just using some of the patterned paper. I just cut a small panel down, and then again using the glossy accents, I put it over the top of the acetate join, and make sure that the strawberries are the correct way up, and then stick that down to cover over on the front. And I do exactly the same thing on the other side as well. I think this may well be one of my favourite cards, being the old clean and simple with the see-through panel. I turn it all over and give it a little trim to make sure all the edges are nice and tidy. And then I'll flip it over back to the front again and run a peel off along each of the seams. That acetate merely works as a stabiliser. You could leave it as just the vellum. You'd lose a little piece because you'd need to anchor it, of course. But I like the stability that the acetate provides. And there, so that's the end of that card. And here we are now with card 8. Now, this may be one of my favourites, but I think it's just because I really like this stamp set. So, okay, what I've done here is I've used a little acetate grid sheet that I got from Simon Says Stamp, just to make sure that my first tile was at right angles, to make sure it wasn't wobbly. And then I used walnut stain oxide, distress oxide, and then I've also got here candied apple. And these are the two inks that I use. And essentially, I'm just building a strip of triangles, and I twist them around so that they're not all as you would expect. And I flip the colour and the pattern. And then when I've finished at the top, I move it down in my MISTI. Now, you may well be able to see that I didn't do the best of a job with lining it up, but it wasn't my intention, because I knew that I would be covering up with peel-offs. Now, these peel-offs had a multitude of sins, and and this is the example of me being able to use up all those little snippety bits that normally you'd put in the bin. So they do come in useful. And all I did here was I ran along the seam of every sort of join, if you like. You can, of course, get this perfect every time, I'm sure, but this way there's some more definition, and I really like the look of it. And here I'm just using some glossy accents over one of the little wood veneers of the house with the little tulips. I really do like these wood veneers, they're so sweet. And here I've got one of the cork tags, and I've got the cutlery set, which I'm using my walnut stain oxide ink on, just for a little bit of tone on tone and to create some interest on the back of the tag. You could do this without the MISTI, it's not necessary. I only stamped once. I think it's just for placement more than anything else. And here I've popped some glossy accents on the back of the little house, and then decided where I wanted to have the tag, cut off the extra of the tail, and then using glossy accents I stuck the top of the tag down, so the circle aspect of the card actually does swing. Now I do have lots of new home stamp sets, but just to show you that sometimes your handwriting is enough. It's a handmade card after all. I just handwrote in pencil, and then I used my walnut oxide distress marker just to pen it in, and I am no letterist by any stretch. I think it's just a case of having fun, and if I'm going to the effort to make a card to give to somebody, they're going to be very happy to receive my handwriting. So that's the end of card 8. Card 9, I've just run one of these little vellum. This is like a lady cooking, reading a cookbook, sorry. And I've made her into a little sticker. And then here is that piece of card front that I cut out, so I'm able to use it again, which is great. And I snip her out, use some double-sided tape, and attach that onto some of the scraps of the pearlescent gold card from the kit, leaving a little bit of a thicker border than usual. And I get my little paper trimmer. Now this paper trimmer has got to be, gosh, I don't know, 15 years old. It's broken, it's battered, you know, and it's been through a lot with me. And here I've used the magnet to draw around onto some of the glittered cardstock, and then I use double-sided tape onto the reverse side, and I use quite a bit just to make sure that I get good firm press onto the magnet. We'll take off the release paper and line it up. As always, I do it a little bit bigger so that I can trim off the edges rather than trying to incredibly carefully get it in exactly the right spot. And then my little tile will fit nicely in the middle. So again, I could have used foam squares and that would have looked nice, but if I want this to stand the test of time on somebody's fridge, then I'd be very surprised if foam squares would stick to glitter for any length of time. So I used double-sided sticky tape. Now, what would have been best would have been to have got some spare magnet to attach this onto the front of the card. That would have been ideal because it wouldn't have left much of a mess. But I didn't think about this until after I'd already started to create the topper. So if you guys haven't made yours yet, perhaps snip off little pieces of the magnet to stick to your card front. Anyway, I've cut a piece of the striped patterned paper, and I've put double-sided tape at the top and the bottom and the sides, and I'm just laying the ribbon into the double-sided tape, using the grid mat to line everything up nicely, and then popping some double-sided tape on top again of the ribbon just to make sure it's got enough adhesive to hold it onto the card front well. And then position that into the centre of the card using the grid mat, because again, if you're ever so slightly off centre, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So here this was my effort at creating something that wasn't going to destroy the card base completely, although I don't think it would do it much good, but I used some acetate and some foam squares so that when you pull it off, the foam squares are perhaps going to be more forgiving with the acetate. And then I put some double-sided tape on either sides of the acetate. But yes, the best thing to do would be just to slice a tiny piece of the magnet off and use those on the card front. But there we go. So now the magnet can be pulled off, and I'll just write a note on the inside of the card just to the effect to say that that is how it can be done. And here's card 10. So I've started off by using my anti-static powder tool all over the card front, which I've turned on its side to make it a side opening card. And I'm using the cutlery stamp with some Versamark ink, and I just want to create sort of like a background. And I could have done this in the Misty, but I did also want to show that you don't always have to have fancy tools to be able to create backgrounds. I'm a very big fan of the Misty. It does help a lot with getting things precise and being able to repeat stamp things exactly where you want them, especially one on top of the other if you don't get a very good imprint the first time. However, stamping blocks are pretty good as well. So anyway, I've sort of twisted it and turned it to make the cutlery one way up and then the other. And here I'm digging out my Nuvo white, glacial white embossing powder, which is a really nice bright white, and it has a good sheen. And once I've tapped away all the excess, I go over the whole of the card front with my heat tool. And here, this is that little strip of paper that was left over from one of my previous cards, but this is a tone on tone of cutlery and crockery, so it matches well with the idea. And I'm just going to cover up that bottom portion of the card using this patterned paper. And then, as ever, turn it over, trim off the extra so that you get a nice clean finish from the front. And big scissors are always better for doing this. You're much less likely to get little snaggy bits and that sort of thing. And here I'm using the little frame. I've just used the pencil to run around the inside very, very faintly. You can't even see it on screen here. But it was just so that I had an idea of where to stamp my various little stamped sentiments and icons. And I just used the candied apple oxide ink just to stamp a few little hearts and the sentiment, the kiss the cook. And here I am just going to stamp the lips from the stamp set, again using the same ink. And I'm doing this on a piece of white cardstock, just some of this from my own stash. And then I fussy cut around the edge of those lips. And I tell you, I must say that it's hit the nail on the head. Tim Holtz with these oxide inks, being able to stamp with them is fantastic, and the fact that they match all the other oxides is brilliant. So I've just rubbed out all of the pencil lines that I just popped down, and I'm using the glossy accents to attach the brass plate, I suppose, the frame on front of the card. And here I'm using some little foam squares, and I'm just sort of placing them on the lips where they won't touch the frame, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And then I use some glossy accents on top. Now, this was the first time I tried glossy accents over oxides, and it does bleed a little bit, and you'll be able to see in my final picture that it's not perfect, but it looks fine. It looks absolutely fine. And then I did come back in with my Nuvo drops to just fill in those little hearts, just to make them a little bit 3D. So here's what's left from my kit. The stamp set, chameleon pen, lots of pieces of patterned paper, and there are still 5 whole sheets of pattern paper, plenty of bits of the specialty cardstock available still, and then there is, I think there was 6 vellum pieces, plenty of sequins, lots of gems, the die, a cork tag, a house, another tag, the ribbons. There was lots, and these are the additional products that I used in making the cards. And when I pile them all up, I always think, God, that's an awful lot that I've used there. But then I like to think that some of these are essentials, and if I didn't have them, I probably would have managed without them. So I'm sorry if it looks like I've used a lot, but I do try to keep it to the bare minimum. Anyway, this is my 10 cards 1 kit for August. I hope you've enjoyed and have been inspired to play with your kits or your crafting products. September is going to see a lot of reveals, and over the next couple of weeks, more and more is going to be released, if you like. The Facebook group, as ever, is wonderful. You can actually win this kit. It has sold out, but I've got 2 available on Instagram. So if you head over there to the Love From Lizi Instagram page, you can check it out. Tag a friend and be in with a chance to win. Anyway, thanks very much for sticking till the end. Until next time, do take care, lots and lots of love, and happy paper crafting. Bye!